Hey everybody, it's day 12 of Vlogmas. It's raining like crazy outside, but it's nice and warm in here, and it reminds me of why I like living in this part of the world, where even though it gets cold and gloomy and gray outside, I can stay inside and turn up the heat and be comfortable and just listen to the sound of the rain. And I think that I wouldn't appreciate it as much if there wasn't cold and rain a lot of the time. So while I feel grumpy that I can't go out and take photos, and that if I have to leave the house, I do so at the risk of my own dryness, it's nice to be cozy sometimes too. It's nice to just kind of like hang out. And I don't have to leave the house because I work over there, like literally just in that other room. So it's not a choice I have to make. Yesterday on the vlog, somebody asked if I'd ever talked about music before, and like the music that I listen to, and I thought that would be a cool topic for us to broach today. I thought I would bring it up. So I want to talk a little bit about like the music that I've been listening to lately, and some music I used to listen to but don't so much anymore, and kind of like my experience in what kinds of stuff that I was into as a kid and where it kind of led me. I remember, I think the very first concert I ever went to, one of my earliest memories of music as something that I cared about, not just music that like my parents or somebody else listened to, was I went to see Weird Al. Weird Al Yankovic is the first like live band I remember ever seeing. And of course, when you're like a white, nerdy 12-year-old or whatever, of course that's the thing that you want to see. I saw it at the Pacific National Exhibition, or the PNE, which is here in Vancouver. We were on a family trip, and I went with a friend of mine and their family. The PNE is a bit like a state fair if you live in America. It runs during the summer, and they have bands that play there, but also like livestock and like dog shows and a bunch of stuff. Blue Jay and I streamed from the PNE 2 summers ago, I think. That VOD might still be in my Twitch highlights, so you could check that out if you want to see what the PNE looks like now and not in the early 90s. So that's one of my first memories. Obviously, my parents had listened to music when I was a kid. I remember memories of sitting in my parents' car. I remember some Wham as a child. Cyndi Lauper, my mom used to listen to a lot. I think my dad only ever really listened to two bands, Meatloaf and the Beach Boys, which is like, I've come to appreciate the Beach Boys, but Meatloaf still evades me. He would do anything for love, but he won't do that. So I have all these memories of my parents listening to music, and so much of my early music memory is in cars, is like sitting in vehicles, waiting at stoplights, or just being driven somewhere as a kid. But as a teenager, most of my memory of music comes from listening to it on a crappy stereo my parents bought me at Costco for Christmas one year, or on like a Discman or a Walkman. I had Walkmans, then I had Discman, but we still used the Walkman to make each other mixtapes. And then when CD burning was a thing, and I was one of the first kids at my school to get a CD burner, I was very popular for about 5 minutes, I started listening to it on my Discman. And you had to get the right one because some of them couldn't play burned CDs, CDRs. And then some of them couldn't play CDRWs. But I kind of got into, as a teenager, I got into punk. I started listening to like crappy pop punk, like the Vandals, like whatever my friends were listening to, because I had older friends when I was in high school, and I was like, oh, whatever you like, I want to fit in, so I'm gonna listen to that. And from punk, I got into metal, started listening to black metal, like at a fairly early age. And this is interesting. I remember listening to Mayhem, maybe, and it couldn't have been later than like 1996 or 7. It was kind of a big deal because that style of metal wasn't really around. Yeah, we were listening to a lot of punk rock and metal and going to a lot of shows in Kelowna, a lot of like hardcore shows and punk shows, and everybody I knew was in a band, and we were playing Dungeons and Dragons or going to shows or like doing theater stuff. And so for me, my misspent youth of going to heavy metal shows at community halls still is a cherished memory. I started listening to 3 Inches of Blood, which is still probably my favorite like accessible metal band. They're amazing. If you haven't listened to them, they're so good. They've got kind of a like Judas Priest thing going on, depending on what album you listen to. They sing about D&D, but also like hockey and They're great. 3 Inches of Blood I started listening to when I was a kid, and I listened to them for the entirety of their career. I was lucky enough that they formed in Vancouver and Victoria, and so they would come to Kelowna all the time on tour. So I got to see them a million times. They were great. And then when I left high school and went to, I moved out, and I moved to Calgary, and I started getting more into like, I guess we called it like indie rock at the time. It was sort of the earlier forms of what we used to call emo, which is not at all like what you would think it is now. But bands like Braid, Hot Water Music, Jets to Brazil, this kind of like not as edgy as punk, but still like kind of emotionally like soft boy music. And like there's some of those bands that I'll go back and listen to, but I've kind of moved away from that as a genre. It just doesn't shit with like guitars and drums and dudes singing quietly about their emotions. Like, it's cool, but I don't know. It's not for me anymore. I've kind of lost interest in that. Though I will still go back and I'll listen to that Postal Service album. Listening nostalgically is totally a thing that I'll do sometimes. And around that time, when I moved from Calgary to Vancouver, I started listening to a much broader selection of music because I started working at a record store. And a friend of mine, his name is Ian Ross, he introduced me to a ton of really good, really eclectic electronic music, some of which I still, to this day, listen to all the time. Murkoff, Tim Hecker, and Chihei Hatakeyama, which is a Japanese artist, who right now, according to Spotify, is my #1 top most listened to artist. Chihei Hatakeyama does like ambient soundscapes. There's a lot of kind of Brian Eno-y, like weird, like almost not music and more like sound texture, which sounds incredibly pretentious, but it's really relaxing and really focusing, and I love listening to it when I'm doing other stuff. So right now, I'm still in this phase that started, 15 years ago when I was working in the record store, but also that's when I started really getting back into listening to hip-hop and to rap. Now, I hadn't listened to rap much at all when I was a kid. I had a neighbor who was really into the Wu-Tang Clan, and I was like, this is scary, and I'm not supposed to be listening to this. I was like 9. But now, I started working at this record store, and I got back into the Wu-Tang. This was around the kind of early 2000s, and I was going out a lot. I knew a lot of DJs. I had moved from knowing punk bands to knowing DJs, and so I got familiar with a lot of like dance music, and this is where most of my interaction with that kind of music comes from. Everything that I know about Baltimore club or Miami booty bass comes from working in that record store and getting an education in that kind of genre. So I moved away from sort of the punk to the metal through my indie rock phase into this phase where I was just kind of listening to everything. And I've kind of kept that up ever since. I've been listening to a wide variety of music. The stuff that I listen to most now tends to be evocative of something that I'm trying to get my head around, right? Like I'll never stop listening to 3 Inches of Blood, Wu-Tang is forever, I will listen to Wolves in the Throne Room, Chihei Hatakeyama. My like top stuff will always be a part of my musical lexicon, but now when I want to get myself into a headspace, like if I'm working on Womb of Night, I'll go back and listen to Sleep, or to other like drone metal or stoner rock, to just get my head into that place. Music does this for me. It helps me embody something, right? It puts me into a place, and I love it. If I'm working on Court of Swords, I'm listening to traditional Vietnamese music, I'm listening to Balinese and Cambodian music. I'm kind of centering in that place. I went through a while where I was reading a ton about the Vietnam War, and I was watching that Ken Burns documentary for like the second time, and I was listening to music of the period. When we did Nebula Jazz, I listened to a ton of jazz music and a bunch of other avant-garde experimental stuff. And it, again, really helped me focus on the creative thing. So for me, whatever creative stuff is going on in my life, usually it's being influenced by music. And I listen to music in one of a couple of places. I'll either listen to it in transit, so like in my car, on the bus, with my headphones on, or I will listen to it in my room here, or in the kitchen while I'm cooking. And so for me, music is around, I like to fill the empty space. I like having music on and around. Whether it's new music or old music that I've loved forever, I'm constantly trying to explore and experiment. And you can find, actually, if you're interested in seeing the kinds of music that I'm sort of into at any given time, tune into my stream. Because during the pre-show, I run 15 minutes where I just try to play some music that I'm into right now. So if you have been tuning in for the last like 6 months or so, my pre-show has all been Japanese funk, soul, jazz, and city pop from the like late 70s to early 80s. So that's my way to share that stuff with you. And again, no video about music would be complete without complaining that I cannot play for you any of these bands because copyright is a thing. So check out my Spotify profile. You can see all the stuff I listen to. I've named a bunch of bands in this thing, and maybe you can find one that you like. Let me know in the comments down below if you've been listening. You're like, oh, Adam would love this band, or Adam would totally be into this song. Tell me. I love discovering new stuff. I will listen to every recommendation, so don't recommend me anything bad, but I will totally listen to any recommendation you give me because I love experiencing new music. So do it. And I hope that I have exposed you to something new too. So there we go. Music. It's a big deal. It's a very big deal for me, anyway. But that's it. That's all we got. I will see you tomorrow for the next one. Bye.